Hello and welcome back. Following up from the last lesson on back office data admin, this lesson will go in another direction yet again and will be a comprehensive intro to tables, table service, and table functions. There is quite a bit to cover, and we'll start with some table basics, including what tables are in BPOS and how table transactions are handled. Then we'll discuss the operator privileges that are related to tables and table service and what they control, and why some operators would be set up one way and another operator set up a different way depending on their role in the business. We'll then look at the Tables tab in Venue Maintenance, where we can set up table groups and their settings. On that tab, we'll also discuss table courses, and then we will finish up with a look at some table till functions as well as a quick look at graphical table maps. Now we won't be going through any demos in SmartPOS in this lesson simply because it is such a long one just to go through all of the setups and configurations that we've got. But don't worry, in the next lesson when we cover receipts and remote printing, we will go through plenty of demos in SmartPOS to cover table service workflows. But like I said, a lot to get through in this one, so let's get started. Alright, we should first chat about what tables are in BPOS. And with that, we should probably start with a discussion about the difference between table transactions and retail transactions. Retail transactions we're already familiar with from other lessons in this course. We log into SmartPOS, start a new transaction, ring up some products, and pay it off. The transaction is not saved to a table or anything like that. There's no data like a table number or seat numbers or a status with it, only what's called a transaction ID, and the transaction itself is opened and closed. Table transactions, on the other hand, can be saved to a table, and I use the term table loosely here, but that'll make more sense soon. And table transactions can have loads of other data that is not collected or stored for retail transactions. We'll get into some of that later. By and large, the main difference between table transactions and retail transactions is that retail are sort of one and done, while table transactions can usually be saved temporarily and reopened and edited prior to being finalized. There are some caveats to that statement depending on the type of table, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to that in a few minutes. And speaking of types of tables, the next thing that should be made clear is that even though they're all collectively called tables, not all tables are in fact physical tables, and that's what I meant when I said I was using the term loosely. We'll talk more about that on the next slide though when we discuss the different table types, but just know for now that some of them are tangible and some of them are not. The intangibility aspect can be difficult to wrap your head around for the first time, but another way to think of tables in BPOS is that they are containers that allow us to group multiple transactions together into what can be described as a parent-child relationship. That link is done via what is referred to as a table ID. So retail transactions have only a transaction ID. Table transactions will have what's called a table ID, but also within the container of the table ID can have multiple transaction IDs. A good example to help visualize it, imagine that we are dining out and the wait staff comes over to take our order. They then go over to SmartPOS, they enter our order, and when they do that, they're starting a new table, so a new table transaction, which will be assigned a table ID. Also, when they first ring up our drinks and maybe some starters at the same time, that initial interaction is a transaction, so it will have its own transaction ID. Then, when they take our order for mains maybe a few minutes later, return back to SmartPOS to enter that in, that will be a new transaction and creates a separate transaction ID, still within the same table ID though. Later on in the meal, we order another round of drinks and they go back to the POS and ring those up. That's another transaction ID, still the same table ID. Towards the end of our meal, we order some dessert. Waitstaff goes back to ring that up separately. Another transaction ID, still the same table ID. So each time the waiter interacts with the table in SmartPOS is a separate and new transaction and therefore a new transaction ID. And when they save the table at the conclusion of each of those interactions, that transaction is ended, but the table is still active. Each time they reopen the saved table for the next interaction, they're beginning a new transaction, which is assigned a new transaction ID. When we are finally finished with our meal and we hand them a big wad of cash or slide them a card or whatever to pay, and they reopen the table to process a payment, guess what? New transaction ID. And when the table's balance is fully paid and brought to zero and the table is finished, that table ID can finally be done with and closed. If we were to look at the transaction journal, which you might remember from the last lesson and we can look at in an upcoming lesson once we go through some demos, we'd be able to see each transaction ID broken down and belonging to the same table ID. Now this same concept holds true for all table types, just different workflows involved, whether it's bistro or delivery, for example. Speaking of bistro and delivery, or you might say bistro, I say bistro, those are some different types of tables. So I mentioned table types a couple minutes ago. Let's chat about our different options for table types here. First and foremost, we've got just classic restaurant tables, so like the example that I just used when explaining table IDs and transaction IDs, where guests are sat down at a table, waitstaff looks after them, they take their orders for potentially multiple courses and separate rounds of drinks, and they ring those all up in the till as they progress through their meal. They open and they save the table potentially a number of times before they finally close the table when the guests pay at the end of their meal. Then we've got bar tabs, which are similar in that the table, and I'm using air quotes here, the table can be saved and reopened, except with bar tabs, there isn't always a physical bar seat that's attached to it. Sometimes it's the guest's name that the bar tab is saved under, and that guest might mingle around the bar, they may order a couple of drinks, maybe a snack, and then pay for their tab at the end of the night. So that's one example of a somewhat intangible table. Now these next three table types on the list we will not get into detail with today, but complex tables are things like split bills, where one physical table might have 3 guests and each guest has a separate bill with only their items on it or portions of items that the guests have shared, and those splits can be paid for individually. Then we've got bistro. So bistro is a bit different as well, and we've got AU style, Australian style in parentheses here. That's a bit different as well, depending on hospitality venues in your part of the world. You may be familiar with these dining environments, you might not be, but with these, rather than a waiter taking your order, you place your order with the cashier and you pay for your items right then and there, which may seem like a retail transaction, and workflows could vary from venue to venue and customer to customer, depending on if someone's dining alone or if they're dining with a group. But what happens after you order is the cashier would then give you some type of object with a number on it. That's your table number. And then you go and sit wherever, and when your food and drinks are ready, someone will find your number and they give you what you've ordered, hopefully. Or they might give you a pager, and when your food or drinks are ready from the kitchen or the bar, they'll buzz your pager and you go and collect the items yourself. The other feature of bistro style is that people that you're dining with can order immediately after you've ordered and paid, and then pay for their own items, but you'll all be grouped under the same table number so that your items should be prepared and served at the same time. Each individual order would have a different transaction ID, but still under the same table ID and the same table number, by the way, for those for bistro. And then we've got delivery and pickup. Very intangible tables here, but the tables in this case are saved under an account with at least a name and phone number, and they're closed when a delivery or pickup order is paid and handed over to the guest, whether it's been delivered or picked up. Also not seen on the screen, but we do have a handful of table reservation interfaces where we can connect to third-party reservation systems and bring across reservation details and send back things like table statuses and payment statuses, things like that. But that's a pretty good summary of our different types of tables. So with that being said, no smooth segue here, but we'll head to back office now and we'll discuss some table-related operator privileges. Alright, so the operator that I've got opened here is a maitre d' here at No Hats, No Stars. You can see that they are in the operator group called Front Desk and Hosts. What I've done prior to this lesson is I've created a handful of operators ahead of time in the database here so that I can demonstrate the different privileges that they may have depending on their role in the restaurant. So if I go over to the Till Privileges tab, we're going to be focusing on these table-related privileges here. The premise behind them is that we're able to control who can do what with regards to tables. Depending on the circumstances or the venue, some operators' roles may require that they be able to do everything table-related, so start new tables, add products to tables that have already been started, process payments, close tables, etc. But some operators may only be or only meant to be able to do some things with tables. So for example, maybe a brand new waiter who's training can only access the table list to add products to tables that have already been created by someone else, but maybe they can't actually do much else like create new tables, remove products, take payments, close tables, so on and so forth. So what we'll do is we'll just run through and explain these table flags, and I'll show some examples of different operators and roles that might exist in a venue, and therefore might be set with different table and waiter flags depending on their role in the venue. By the way, some of these actions that we'll look at do have separate privilege flags for retail transactions. For example, clears and returns, we have separate flags for those in tables, and we have separate flags that control those for retail transactions here in the voids and returns section. So the first table flag is table sales. It is a powerful flag. It's at the top of the list because it does sit above the others by actually controlling access to table lists in SmartPOS to begin with. So it essentially overrides the other table flags. If it's off for any operator, they will just get nowhere fast because they'll just be hit with a prompt in SmartPOS. If they try to access a table list, they'll be hit with a prompt essentially saying that their operator privilege doesn't allow for table sales and doesn't allow them to access the table list. That goes for standard table sales as well as for bistro tables. However, I should point out that access to delivery and takeaway sales are actually controlled by this account till functions flag, since those are technically account sales, but more on that when we get to accounts in an upcoming lesson. Anyway, sticking with tables for now, after an operator has been granted access to table sales overall, with this flag, we can then get very exact as far as who can do anything else with tables once they do have access to a table list or to a graphical table map. So someone like Logan, our maitre d' here, might not have access or have the ability to create new tables, even though they can access tables that were already created, but they can process payments for them, they can close tables, and they can set table waiters, even though they themselves are not set up as a table waiter. So that's one way that Logan here might have their table-related operator privileges set for their role in the restaurant, just working at the front desk. If we take a look at a different operator, maybe Casey, our head wait staff here, maybe Casey has some different privileges here. Notice, by the way, that they've got the use group settings flag turned off, so that way different wait staff within this operator group can have different privileges set. But Casey here may be able to create new tables. So not only do they have access to the table list, but they can create new tables. They can also clear unsaved table items. What that means is that any products on a table that have not yet been saved or sent to the kitchen, they can actually remove those. So referencing back to the transaction IDs from earlier, if Casey here, our head wait staff, opens a table that already has drinks on it and maybe some starters saved to it, but they've now started a new transaction on that table to send through the mains and maybe another round of drinks. If they make a mistake before hitting send, they can clear the products from that transaction if they need to. But in order to remove any of the drinks or starters that were already saved in a previous transaction on that table, Casey would also need this flag turned on called return saved table items. The keyword there being saved. In this scenario, maybe that privilege is only allotted to management, for example. By the way, this return saved table items flag also covers being able to use the minus key to sell negative quantities of a product on a table. I should mention that. Now then, Casey here, being the head waitstaff, can then also take table payments, but they cannot close tables even if the tables do have a zero balance. So maybe in our venue here, no hats, no stars, only the maitre d' and the manager can actually close tables after they've been cleaned and reset. There is a table group flag that would play a role in those types of scenarios also, but we'll get to our table group flags shortly. Then we've got our waiter banker tills only, which Casey, due to their head waitstaff role, might need that flag off so that they are not being restricted from only using tills in the main restaurant or in a store in the venue that requires waiter banking. So what this flag controls is an operator being authorized to log into tills for stores, and I should probably save this, and I will actually open the store settings for our one and only store in this database. So what that flag is referring to, or what it controls, is whether or not an operator can log into tills for stores that do not have this flag turned on, called waiter banking. In this case, for the no hats, no stars main restaurant, I'll actually want to turn that on, and that's just letting me know that that there's a flag for table groups that are off, and I'll address that shortly when we get to those. But I want to turn that on for our main restaurant here, meaning that each waiter will hold their own money and they'll pay what they owe from their sales to the business at the end of their shift. So they are essentially their own bank. They're not reliant on a till drawer for anything, so they won't need access to a till drawer. There is a table group flag involved. That was what that morning prompt was for a second ago, and we'll get to those next. So if an operator does have that waiter banker tills only flag turned on, they can then only log into tills in stores that are set up for waiter banking that have this flag turned on. So essentially it is a security mechanism to prevent waitstaff, or just operators in general, from using tills in other stores where waiter banking is not used. But Casey, the head waitstaff that we were just looking at, has that restriction turned off because sometimes they may need to jump behind the cocktail bar. Now I know we haven't created other stores in this database yet, but let's pretend that we have, and we have another store that's been set up as the cocktail bar, and that store is not set up for waiter banking, meaning that that store does have drawers in the tills in that store. So in order for Casey to then be able to jump on the tills behind the bar to help out and have access to those till drawers, Casey will need to have that restriction turned off. So if we go back and look at Casey, that is why they've got the flag turned off for waiter banker tills only, so they are not restricted to only tills in those stores. As we finish up with Casey here, Casey can also set table waiters, so another advantage or responsibility of being head waitstaff is that they can assign other waitstaff to tables, which can then control who has access to which tables. But these table waiter and allowed table settings also plays a role there. So firstly, an operator with the table waiter flag turned on can be attached to a table as a waiter, provided that the table group is set up for table waiters. More on that in a minute. I know I keep mentioning table groups. Promise we'll get there next. And what that'll do is if an operator is marked as a table waiter and they have tables assigned to them, the system is going to generate waiter totals on the till balance report for those waiters. Now what this allowed tables dropdown controls is which tables waitstaff can access and interact with. So Casey, again, because they're head waitstaff here, are allowed access to all tables. If we wanted to restrict an individual to only being allowed certain tables, their own tables that have been assigned to them, then we would turn on only my table's there. But for Casey, we've got that set for all tables. So if we save Casey and we look at General Waitstaff Riley here, who is not head waitstaff, they're going to have some different restrictions or some different privileges, I should say. So they might be only allowed to access their assigned tables here, and we can see they've got some other restrictions compared to Casey also. They cannot clear anything from tables even if they are unsaved, and they can only use workstations in stores that are configured for waiter banking, so they've got that flag turned on, and they do not have the ability to set table waiters. Cool. And then another example, if we go to our training waitstaff operator group, we've got Tyler here, and Tyler's maybe an assistant waitstaff or a waitstaff in training, and so for now they don't have full waitstaff capabilities or responsibilities within the venue. They mostly just run food and clean and reset tables, but they might be assigned a table or a couple tables a night here or there just to sort of help out and get some experience under their belt. So Tyler here can only access tables that have been created by someone else. So they've got the table sales flag turned on still, but they cannot create tables. They cannot do really much with tables at all. They can only access tables that have been created by someone else and then assigned to them. Most likely that's been done by head waitstaff or a manager. Now in the future, yeah, they'll probably have some of their privileges changed so that they can do more, but for now, Tyler can only add items to their tables and save them. Now if we look at someone who might have a lot more leeway with regards to table privileges, we might look at our manager Mason here. So I mentioned a minute ago that a manager might be one of the people to create and assign tables to Tyler, the waitstaff in training there, and manager Mason may be one of those people that could do that. So they are going to have all of the privileges here, none of the restrictions. They can do anything and everything table related. They can use tills whether they're in waiter banking stores or not, and while they themselves are not set up as a table waiter, Manager Mason here will still have access to all tables. So hopefully you've been able to see there why some different individuals with varying roles and responsibilities in a venue may have different operator privileges enabled and disabled, specifically with table service in mind. So with those taken care of now, we will head to venue maintenance and we will dive into table groups, which I've mentioned a few times here now. And that takes us over to the Tables tab. You can see there is a lot going on here, but we will get through this relatively quickly, starting with the table group section at the top here. Before we do get into each table group setting, if I scroll over, you can see there's quite a few of these here. I should briefly explain to you what table groups are, because as I've said, I've touched on table groups throughout the past 20-25 minutes or so of this lesson, but I have not actually explained what they are yet. So the concept of table groups is that we can differentiate between certain areas of the venue or between certain intangible types of tables, where each table grouping might require their own configurations and or rules to follow. It also means that each table group can have distinct table numbers if needed as well. For example, these are the table groups that will be created by default, just to give you an idea of what various table groups might be used for. So we might have some dining tables in the venue that need their own set of table numbers and their own settings and rules to follow, but then bar tabs at the venue's bars. We might use a different numbering subset, and maybe for bar tabs we have a different set of rules to follow than we do for dining tables, so we might have different flags and such turned off or on here for that table group. Then maybe the venue also has bistro service and delivery and pickup, and potentially a few others, and each of those table groups can have their own settings and their own rules to follow. So this table group section lets us configure up to 8 distinct table groups in the venue. Feel free to rename these in your database, by the way, if you'd like to. These are just how they're labeled by default, just to give you an idea of what they could be used for. Now, some of these table group settings may be a bit self-explanatory, but we will be as comprehensive as possible and we will go through each one of them regardless. So we will just go through each one of them in order, starting with the table group number, which I can pin that down. I can pin the table group name down as well, so that way when we slide, those were already pinned down by default. So that way when we slide to the right, those will stay in place for us. So the table group number, yes, you can see that begins with 0 and runs through 7 for our 8 table groups. Why that's important is that the number that's associated with each table group is what's used when we set up our table-related till function buttons, where we do need to define a table group. But we'll come to that later after we get through our venue maintenance here and we head to look at some till functions. But there are a number of till functions related to tables that we will need to know that table group number. The table group name, as I said, that can be anything, so we can rename those if we'd like to, but that should be relevant to how the table group is being used in the venue. Whatever is entered into these fields will appear in back office settings and reporting. Really anywhere that the table group number is not being used as the identifier, the table group name will be used. Then we've got a column labeled price number adjust. What that allows for is directing each table group to a different price number from the system. If you recall back to where we can maintain those on the names tab. But if we are using this, what we're entering is not the number of the price number that we want that table group to use. Rather, whatever number is entered is going to be added to the till's current price number for the table group's transactions. That's the adjust part of the name, but just something to keep in mind when that is being implemented. Next column takes us to ask name, which is probably one of the more self-explanatory settings. This would be used if we'd like to prompt staff to enter a name for a table. So if we turn that on for the table group, anytime a table is created for that table group in SmartPOS, the staff is going to be prompted to enter a name. There are some alternate ways to do that with till functions that we will get into in a few minutes and we'll see in a demo in the next lesson. Next to that then we have ask number guests. This is another one that probably doesn't need much explanation, but if that's on for a table group, then when a new table is created, the operator is also going to be prompted to enter the guest count. And that can be useful for a few different reasons. Firstly being, if there is an automatic service charge that's been set up in the system that needs to apply based on the number of guests at a table, we would want that turned on. That way, if the number of guests reaches that threshold, the automatic service charge will be applied. That can also be useful in conjunction with entering seat numbers, which we'll get to next. And another table group flag that we'll see in a bit if I scroll over is called ask guests as splits, or ask splits as guests, I should say. The ask number guest flag needs to be turned on for this to even be applicable and used at all. You can see if I turn that off and I scroll over, I will not be able to turn that on at all. So this does need to be turned on for me to be able to actually turn that on as well, but we'll get to that in just a second. By the way, there is also a till function that can be used to enter the number of guests manually, but as I've said, this flag being on will force that functionality for all tables in the table group. Then we've got ask seat, which we've also got a till function that we can use to enter seat numbers manually, but I will turn this on for this table group. This is then a more proactive approach so that when wait staff are adding products to a table within this table group, they will be automatically prompted to enter a seat number. That can then be very useful in service settings where guests are served by seat number, because the numbers will actually print next to items on the dockets that are printed to remote kitchen printers. That way when the food runner or other wait staff are bringing the plates out, They won't need to ask who's ordered the salmon, for example. They'll know that just goes to seat number 3. A bit more professional just to have that in use and be able to use that. Cool. That brings us to do not ask close, which is, as you've seen, all of these flags are going to be off by default. What that means when it's off, though, is that operators will be prompted each time to close a table if the table's balance is brought to 0. That might be necessary for some settings and for some table groups, but if this flag is on, then when an operator has processed the payment for a table or in some other way brought the table's balance to 0, they will not be prompted to close the table. It will just close automatically. Now that workflow might be preferred for some table environments, and asking operators to close manually might be preferred for other table environments. It just depends on each venue's needs and how they would like to operate, how they would like that closed table procedure to work. Next to that, we've got ask if change / tip. So by default, any overpayment on a table is going to be treated as change, which should be returned to the guest. However, if this flag is turned on for a table group, then cash overpayments are going to trigger a prompt at the till asking the operator how to treat that overpayment. Basically, if it should be change or if it should be a tip. Overpayments for other types of tender will just be automatically recorded as tips. Next, we've got reopen on reprice. So the premise behind this flag is for instances when a table or tab has an account attached to it, which subsequently reprices the table and saves it automatically. This will make more sense when we get into accounts in an upcoming lesson, but by default the workflow there is just that the table is repriced and saved, which is what we want, so that any repricing due to the account being attached is going to happen. But do we then want the operator to have to manually reopen that table, or do we just want it reopened automatically? And that is what this flag controls. If it's turned on, when that table is saved due to the repricing, the table will then reopen automatically. Then on a completely unrelated note, the next column over is for warning minutes, which means that we can enter into this field maybe 90 minutes, and that number of minutes after tables in this table group were created, they will be marked with a status of overtime in the table list and on the table map. Really great feature to implement if the venue has something like a target table turnover time for a dining table group where, let's say, after a table's been seated for X number of minutes, in this case 90 minutes, maybe it's then time for wait staff to hurry them along so we can get some new guests into those seats or something like that. And that is the idea behind that one. And that brings us to do not pre-auth. Do not pre-auth is only applicable in venues that use a linked credit card system, where by default the first charge to a card is only a pre-auth. However, this can be set so that credit cards will just be charged immediately without a pre-auth being applied. Unrelated to that, we've got single use only. So by default, a table can be opened and worked on at multiple tills at the same time. That might be necessary. There could be, if it's in a venue that runs events or large parties or something like that, where maybe there's a bartender that's ringing up drinks at the same time that wait staff may need to be accessing a different till to ring up food. And in those cases, we might want separate operators to have the same table open on multiple tills at the same time. But if we do not anticipate anything like that happening for a table group, and we want to make it so that a table can only be accessed by one till at a time, we would want to turn that flag on so that it can only be accessed from one till at a time. Somewhat related to that, definitely related to the operator flags that we looked at earlier, is the ability to set a table group as waiter required, meaning that a waiter must be set for each table in this table group when it's created. So I will want to turn that on for this table group in our No Hats, No Stars store here, or a No Hats, No Stars venue, I should say. Now, if this flag is turned on and an operator is set up as a table waiter, they will be automatically set as the waiter for any tables that they create. But if that person is not a waiter themselves, which we saw the operator flags that control that, they will then be prompted to set a waiter for tables that they create, of course provided that they have the ability to set table waiters. Cool, then we have another pre-auth flag next to that, pre-auth on open. So this one is for if the venue is using an external FPOS system that has pre-auths turned on. We would want to turn this on so that staff will be prompted to enter a pre-auth amount when creating tables, so on table open. Then we've got another one related to table service, pre-closed tables. This is an option that is commonly used with reservation systems or dining environments that require tables to be placed into something like a cleaning status, just for a period of time after the table has been paid, but prior to the table being available to actually be seated again. So this would be turned on for those table groups, meaning that after a transaction has been fully paid, the table will remain in the system as unavailable. It's going to have a status of pre-closed until someone does manually come through, select it from the table list or from the table map, and set it as available. Cool, we are nearly finished with these table group flags. The next one, no offset, is related to a pretty high-level concept called table group offsets that we will not be getting into in this course, so we can just leave that one alone. Next to that is the Ask Splits as Guests flag that I mentioned a few minutes ago, which again, the Ask Number of Guest flag needs to be turned on for us to be able to turn this one on. So because we've got that on, I can turn this on. But when a table is created and the operator enters the number of guests, if this flag's turned on, they will also be asked if they would like to split the table based on the number of guests, so one split per guest. In places where split tables are frequently used, this just provides a simplified workflow to creating splits, but we can do that manually. Again, this is just going to be a proactive approach to doing so. And then finally, for our table group flags, we come to a couple of other table service related ones, waiter payments and waiter tips, which would be used along with the waiter required flag in dining environments where waiter service is in place and they process their own table payments and then are paid out their tips at the end of their shift. So the functionality of the waiter payments flag for a table group is that when an operator is assigned to a table, even if another operator processes a payment for the table, maybe the maitre d' or the manager for example, that payment will be allocated to the table's assigned waiter and not the person who processed the payment. So we would want to turn that on to make that happen. Along with that, the functionality of the waiter tips flag is that if another person processes a payment for another waitstaff's table and there's a tip involved, the tip will also be allocated to the table's assigned waitstaff, not the person who processed the payment. Alright, that is a wrap on our table group settings, or table group flags and settings here. Of course, each venue will set things up differently than to how I've set this up here, and each table group within the venue will most likely be set up differently as well. Some might require things like guest name, seat numbers, waiter functionalities, etc., and others won't. Some may have a table group that needs a price number adjustment set up, others won't. Some may want warning minutes configured, some might not want that. Some might need to be set for single use only, and others even within the same venue might require that flag to be turned off for different table groups, so on and so forth. But some examples there of different use cases and different table groups that might need things set up differently, which we can do within the one venue. Alright, we will skip over these table colors for now and down to the table courses section. What this section lets us do is, per venue, is to configure up to 4 of the system's sort types to be defined as courses 1 through 4. So just a quick refresher, if I open up a product from our product list, maybe go to our starters, and we'll look at our buffalo wings here. We would first of all probably want to have the product sort for these set to the correct thing of starters. So just a quick refresher. we've got those the product sorts that are defined in the global settings and are then assigned to products there. So any product that is assigned one of the 4 sorts that are used as the venue's courses would then be considered to belong to that course. For example, since this product is now assigned to the product sort called starters, if I save that, we could then define, if I go back to the tables tab, we could then define course 1 sort as starters. You can see we've got our list of up to the 30 sort types that we can configure and define in the database here. So we could then define starters as the course 1 sort. Then whenever something happens with course 1 on a table where that product has been sold, the buffalo wings we were looking at a minute ago, that product would be included if it's on the table, if something happens to course 1. For a bit more context on that, on the things that could happen to courses, is that each course has 3 possible statuses. A course can be sold, a course can be served, and a course can be marked as away. So if any products that are mapped to course 1 are sold on a table, the table status will show as course 1 sold. So if we have this set up as I've done so here, when we then sell an order of those smoked buffalo wings to a table, and save that and send that through, the table itself will then have a status showing as course 1 sold. Then as the table goes through their meal and various courses can be sold and then set as away and set as served in the system, which can be controlled using till function buttons, which we'll get to in a bit. So as tables and their items progress from being added to the table being sent to the kitchen to then being served, the table status will be updated as well to correspond with the courses that have been set as sold, served, and away. So yeah, this is a feature set that may only be used in fine dining settings, but it's really in any full service dining environment that uses courses, this certainly could be implemented. But once we have these defined, we might say sort 2 would be entrees for course, or for course 2 sort might be entrees, and then mains and desserts, or maybe we would only use courses 1 through 3, maybe just the starters, mains, and desserts, and not use a course 4, but we could set that up like that. And I'll show this again when we get to till functions shortly and when we run through some demos in the future, but we can configure a till function called table away, and we can link that to course 1 or to whichever of the courses we need to in the till function setup. Then whenever that till function is used, if we roll with the course 1 example, and it's been set up for course 1, so whenever that's used to set course 1 items as away on a table, a course away message is going to print to remote printers notifying kitchen staff, and the table status is going to update to, in this case, starters away, since that's the name of the product sort that we've got assigned here. The statuses can be shown on table lists as well as graphical table map in SmartPOS, where the table's color would be updated based on the status. More on that in a second, but you can probably put 2 and 2 together with the colors and the course numbers there. I'll also point this out while we're here because it's in this section, the no order warning minutes. This is separate to this warning minutes up here, so this is actually used to configure the amount of time that needs to pass either after the table has been created with no order placed, or since the last time that an order was placed on the table. If it were set to maybe 30 minutes, we'll say, for example, a table that hasn't had an order placed in 30 minutes is going to be marked with a warning. On a table list, it'll be highlighted in red, or on a table map, it'll have a little red dot on the table. Alright, changing gears a little bit now, but we'll get into some of the more common table-related till functions, and then we will come back and we'll run through these table colors. These are related to graphical table maps, which will be our last little topic for today. But for now, I will just save this, and we will head to our till function map. And we'll just look at this function panel 1 for now. So the first table-related till function that we should talk about is just called table open. If we look at both of these are both the same for graphical table. I'll actually want to change one of them to just be table open, and I will rename that table list. So this is what's going to be used to bring up the table list in SmartPause so that we can view a list of currently open tables that have been saved so that they can be reopened and interacted with. From that list, we can also create new tables. Now, the list is going to be for whichever table group is identified in the item field here. In this case, table group 0. So that's the one that's called, that was just called table in this database. It was our basically table group 1, but it's defined as table group 0. So when I reference the table group numbers being needed for some table till functions where the table group needs to be defined, this is one example. Then using the sub item field, we can configure some additional appearance and workflow type things. We won't get into the details today, but some options here for sorting the table list and auto numbering and so forth. And using the key field, we could enter a preset table number to use if we'd like to do something like that, or the number to start auto numbering tables from if that's being used. There is also a table open alpha option, which I'll place on this, I'll just place it here on this garnish button. If I go to tables and accounts to that function, and then there's a sub function table open alpha, and I will label that for when we get to our demo in the next lesson as bar seats. So this function table open alpha behaves mostly the same way as just the table open function. And you can see that it has the same setup options here. The difference being that it will prompt with a full on-screen keyboard, allowing for entering alphanumeric characters as the table number rather than just numbers, which is why that would be used for something like bar tabs here, so that they can be named instead of just numbered. And that could be used for other instances also where a name would need to be saved as the table number. Something like events and parties where we might want to save a name with that table that's been opened and saved. By the way, you'll see when we get into a demo in the next lesson that when we open a table via one of these table open functions, the function panel in SmartPause will change dynamically to show a bunch of table functions. A bit of background to that is that there are two, and some of this might sound familiar from the previous lesson where we went through setting up till functions, but there are two default panels that will contain till functions specifically for use with tables, or for table transactions. One of them is just called panel table, and the other I will actually need to add is called table panel 2. And let me just go back to table 1 for now, just this regular table panel. So when a table is opened using the table open, just the regular table open function or table open alpha, or one of the graphical table functions that we haven't seen yet, this table panel is going to automatically display on the function app at the till. Within this table panel, we can see the functions that have been included with this function map template, the one that I had copied a few lessons ago, but we might want to change these around. We might also do something like, we might reuse this note button over here, and I might change this to a panel selection to actually take us to the table 2 panel, and I might rename that. That way, once we have a table open and therefore the table function panel has changed to show, or the till function panel has changed to show this table panel, we'll be able to access the table 2 panel here and get to some additional table functions, but for now we'll stick with the regular table panel. So when we were looking at the table group settings earlier, I showed the flags that we can set per table group to force prompts that ask for staff to enter guest names and guest count when a new table is created. And I mentioned that there was an alternate manual method as well, and that's what this enter name and guest count till function here can be used for. So using the item and the sub item fields, we can be set up to either ask for just one of those or for both. So even if the table group is already configured to prompt for the name and guest count automatically, this till function can then be used to change those if we need to. Earlier we also looked at the table group flag that we can set if we want Wait staff to be prompted to enter a seat number, and I mentioned that there's a manual option for that too. There's actually a few different options for how this set seat till function can be configured. Even if the seat numbering is on for the table group, this function can still be used to increment from one seat to the next when we're adding items to the table. It can alternatively be set up to change the seat number for a product, so we could add a separate iteration of the till function button to do that. And we could even have a few different duplicates of this same till function all within one panel, and they could all be preset to different seat numbers that we could configure here using the sub item field if we wanted to do something like that. Now, another common action in table service, if I do head to the table 2 panel, I think we've got one there. So here we have a couple different options that have been set up. We've got transfer to bar and we've got transfer to table. A couple different options for us depending on the table group that we will be transferring to. So for this transfer to table option, this would be used when we're just transferring to a table group that only uses table numbers. And for the transfer to bar, we might actually want to change this one to table transfer alpha rather than just table transfer, because when we are transferring a table or to a table group that uses alphanumeric table names, like what we just set up for bar tabs in this database, we would want to be able to enter names when we're transferring to that table group as well. So for either of these options, we do just need to then enter the table group number of where we are transferring to into the item field here. So in this case, we would be transferring tables to that table group 0, and for this case, we'd be transferring to table group 1. If we quickly refer back to our venue list, just as a quick refresher, that is what these table group numbers are here for. Table group 0 and table group 1. Again, 1 is for our dining tables, or I should say 0 is for our dining tables, and 1 is for our bar tabs. Alright, just a few others here to discuss before we move on to graphical table maps. So set warning, or the table function, or the sub-function table warning. We saw in the table group settings that we can pre-configure a warning time for an entire table group. Well, depending on how we set the sub-item field in this table warning function, this could then be used to display how much time is left on the clock for those for that warning time that's set for the table group. Or we could use this till function and we could configure it using the sub-item field to be able to set a warning time for tables individually. But keep in mind that if we are using it to set the warning minutes from the till, it is not a retroactive timer. It will start the warning timer when that button is pressed from the till. Just an alternate way to manage table turnover times rather than having it preset at the table group level. Alright, moving on. This one that's labeled set as tagged is our table tag sub function. So if we just want to tag a table for some internal referencing reason, we do have an option to do that with this function. So we could either set it as a toggle or only to set or to clear the tag. The table will then show on the table map with a little colored dot, or on the table list in a contrasting color. We'll see that in the next lesson when we get to some demos. And the last few that I'll mention are the table away and the table course served functions, which are linked back to the table courses that we looked at in venue maintenance earlier. So as I mentioned when we were looking at the table courses, we can use the table away function to print a message to remote kitchen printers showing the course name as away. This one here is set up for course number 1, which again is mapped to the product sort that's called starters in this database. So that will print a message to remote printers that says starters away. Unless we use the key field down here and we enter some alternate message to be printed, by default it will just print as starters away. We can also designate which printer profile is going to be used, so therefore which remote printers the message will print to, but more on printing and printer profiles in the next lesson. And by the way, you'll see when we get back into SmartPause in that next lesson that when we set the table as X number course away, the table status is also going to be updated. And then likewise for the table course served subfunction, we have the same options, but rather than printing a course away message and setting the status to course away, it is going to print a course served message for the course, whichever is defined in the item field here. So in this instance, we've got some separate iterations of the same subfunction, one for each course, that we could then use to set each course as away and served as needed from SmartPOS. Now, we certainly have not had a chance to go through all of the table-related subfunctions that we have available, but the rest can be found either by searching or by just browsing through this tables and accounts subfunction here. You can see that we've got a couple dozen available. So yeah, obviously we don't have time to go through all of them in this one lesson, but we did highlight a few of the key ones and we will demonstrate those in the next lesson. But if you'd like to take a look at some additional ones, feel free to have a test some of these out on your own. I will point out that we've got separate functions for opening bistro tables and for delivery and pickup, and a handful of other table functions that we, as I said, just don't have time to get to in this lesson, unfortunately. And we also do have options in here to open a table using a graphical table map, and we've got an alpha option for that also. Graphical table maps are the final topic for this lesson. So graphical table maps, as the name implies, lets us design a map that replicates the layout of a dining room or an area of the venue, and then assign the map to be used at a till so that staff can use it as an interactive map during table service. So let's see what these are all about. The first thing we need to do is to actually design the table map itself, which is going to be done from maintenance, and then we've got an option towards the bottom labeled table maps and sets. This is going to be very similar to the key maps and key sets that we looked at earlier in the course. As we've seen in many instances in this course, since this is a new database just like yours is, we don't have any that are saved or defined yet in this database. So we will just run through the process to create a new one, which starts with the option from the top to add a new table map. Now, we're prompted here to select the table map to copy. We obviously don't have any to copy, so we're just going to use blank. We're then immediately going to be prompted to enter a name. Just name it something like No Hats, No Stars Dining Room. Click OK, and now we have our blank table map editor. Now if we need to, we can enter a different display name for when the map is shown at the till. Just call this one Dining Room, so that'll display at the till just showing Dining Room, not the No Hats, No Stars prefix there. Then we can do some different things here, like set up the map size and set up background, texture, images, things like that. A lot of different options here that we have for how we can actually configure the map. Then if we want to, we can just go full on manual. We can right click on the map to add tables and other shapes and things that we might need. But if we do need to add a large number of tables, we have some options at the top for auto creating tables, or we have auto add tables if we right click. If we go to the top, we have auto create tables. And then we can just set a default table shape. Maybe I'll go with round. We'll just go with auto for that. And then we can just preset the first table number and the last table number to use. So maybe in our dining room here, we start with table 11 for whatever reason. And we go to table number 45. Click OK. We're just going to automatically generate a table map there. And we can then drag these tables around however we need to. We can right click on those and access some properties if we need to change the table number, if we need to change the shape for that particular table. We can configure how we would like the chairs to be set, different things like that, some different options. There we go. Probably not a great example of how we might actually make a table look, but just to show you how we can configure these and design them. And we can actually resize these as well if I get it in the right spot. On the edge there we go. We can resize that in that direction, resize it, whoops, resize it in that direction. Obviously we don't want those overlapping, so we might delete some tables here if we need to. It just depends on the dining room itself. Obviously this should replicate pretty closely to the actual dining room, so we might delete some tables and then add some manually, move that around, add another table in here, do whatever we need to. If we right click, also notice that we can add shapes, so we might need to add some things to the map to represent maybe plants or different walls or different shapes and things like that of other objects in the dining room in this example, so we can do things like that as well. That really is the gist of it. We've got a bunch of options there. We can get pretty spot on with being able to replicate the floor plan of a dining space, and then we can save the table map and exit. Now obviously this isn't perfect, and I will fix this up a bit before the next lesson, but for time's sake at the moment, I will just save this. If I scroll up to the top, we've got our option to save the table map up here. This obviously isn't linked to any tills at the moment, but it's still going to prompt to process those changes through Smart Controller. So now we have our table map added. The next thing we need to do is actually add it to a table map set. The table map set is what is then going to be assigned to each till. So if we access table map sets from the top, we can see that we have none created here, so I'll need to add a new table map set, and I'll need to name this one. Just call it something very generic, no hats, no stars there. If this were being used by any tills, we'd be able to see it here. I will just go ahead and add our one table map here. You can see that we can add up to 8 table maps to one table set that could then be accessed from each till. We do, for each table map, we do need to designate which table group it uses. So in this case, rather than seeing the table group numbers, we actually do see the table group names. So I might just leave this one for table. Now that doesn't mean that table maps and table groups are one-to-one. Each table map can be assigned a different table group, or multiple maps can share a table group if need be. So that's really all we need to do for this, and then we can assign it to tills quite easily right from here. And just select the till to assign that to, and we can see that has been changed. Now we can verify that, and the other way that we can assign that or change it is from Workstation Maintenance. And on the till setup tab here in the general section, we have this drop down called table map set, and we can confirm that has been assigned to it, that NHNS table map set that I just created. And if we wanted to change that to something else, if we had additional table maps in this database, we could change that manually from here also. Cool, then back to our venue maintenance while we're here. We do have a number of configurations specifically for graphical tables that we skipped over before. If I come back to our tables tab, we can actually configure these colors to correspond with each possible table status, so that when staff are viewing a table map at the till, they can see basically what part of the journey each table is on, whether the table is available, if the table has just been seated, if their bill has been printed, so on and so forth. And we can just assign these to whatever we'd like to here. Get pretty creative, I guess, with how you'd like these to be set up. These will apply to all table groups in the venue, and if there's any table status that doesn't need to be shown in the color legend on the graphical table map, so maybe for example course 4 isn't being used in the venue, we would just leave the color as black, and we can see that explained right down here for us also. So before the next lesson, I will set some of these colors up so that we can see that in our demo. For now, if we come over to the flags tab, the last little bit to go over before we wrap up are these graphical tables flags, which give us the option to control which info or data, if any, we would like to show on the tables themselves on the graphical table map. Just keep in mind that there are going to be some limitations as to the number of characters that will be able to be shown, or they may be truncated depending on the map size and the table size on the table map itself. So we saw when I was creating that table map a couple minutes ago that some of the tables can be made larger than others, so just keep that in mind. Some tables may be able to fit more information on them than others. Some tables, depending on the size that they are on the map, may not be able to display much information at all, the information may get cut off, so on and so forth. So just keep that in mind when deciding what information we would like to show on the table maps. So first and foremost, if the venue is using table maps, this do not use graphical tables flag needs to be off. And from there, we can then choose to display the table number, the guest count, table balance, time since seated, time since last order, and the waiter name. Now, some venues may place a higher importance on having some data shown. It is not advised to have all 7 of these turned on though, so maybe just pick some like the table name, or sorry, the table number, maybe the guest count and table balance, and just pick maybe 2 or 3 items to be shown. Again, does depend on the size of the tables on the map. Alright, that is going to be a wrap for this lesson. I know it was a lot to take in a relatively short period of time, but we've covered a very comprehensive look at tables and table service setup so that you should be able to configure operator privileges, table groups, table courses, table till functions, and even graphical table maps and table map sets, and assign those to your tills. Then you'll see very shortly how all of those configurations will impact SmartPOS workflows for table service. Until then, thanks for watching.